Cages or wings, which do you prefer? Ask the birds. Fear or love, baby, don't say the answer. Actions speak louder than louder than louder than louder than louder than cages or wings, which do you prefer? Ask the birds. Fear or love, baby, don't say the answer. Actions speak louder, louder than louder than. They speak louder, louder than louder than. Actions speak louder than.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Stoller, and I'm the Director of New Work for Keen Company. In 2021, we had the pleasure of welcoming 3 writers into our Playwrights Lab for mid-career artists, Carlos Murillo, Vicky Ramirez, and Harrison David Rivers. What you're about to see is those writers discussing their experience with us in the lab this past year, and also sharing excerpts of their work read by a handful of incredible actors. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you continue to engage with the work of these writers and also with the work of Keen Company. Enjoy.
We've been sort of limited to our rooms, to our personal space, and theater is such a collaborative art form that it's been a little bit difficult to sort of just sit and create in that way. Inspiration is tricky because normally you get out and socialize and be amongst people and find moments there that just stirred something. And pretty much most of the time you had to rely on your sofa and your books and then the television that you already, all these things you already have. So it's been tricky, but it's also been exciting in that we've had great opportunities to bring the theater community together across the country, sort of in this shared sort of breakdown. You know, we've all lost access to in person, but we've all reached out over the internet, and that has been nice in extending the community and for, you know, growing bonds across the country from, you know, in that hole from the pandemic.
Teaching took a lot out of me this year, and I felt like that you know, Zoom school, dealing with the students on a much more kind of like raw emotional level, you know, just because of what they were going through, and you know, the every day was a struggle for everybody. That left very little time and headspace for my own stuff, but it was also actually like really reflective in some ways, and that sort of like constant need to generate, that constant need to, you know, move a project forward. I think one of the things I valued about the last year was like being able to say, okay, we can just slow down, right? And we don't have to always be kind of like on the train, you know, and that things will come when they come, and that's, you know, and I also so appreciate Vicky and Harrison and their sort of generosity of being like, you know, well, you know, I might not have pages today, but I'm here and present with you, and so that was really great to have, for sure.
I feel like I think about the landscape of my life in a different way every day, and it feels like the landscape is always shifting. But I do think that this was a year of deepening for me. I said a lot of yeses in 2020, sort of at the start of COVID, entered into a lot of relationships, some with friends, some with theaters who I had collaborated with before, and then a lot of new collaborations. And so 2021 was a time of sort of furthering those collaborations and moving into draft form with various commissions and sort of continuing threads of conversations that had started in lockdown. So I think that would be the word that I would use, like it's a time of deepening. Also, I started some new things this year. TV became sort of a bigger part of my life this year. And so I do feel like that took up time, took up space in my life in a different way, and really starting to figure out how to balance TV and theater. I have not achieved that balance yet, but I am working toward that balance. So a deepening and then also sort of working toward a kind of balance.
I would say that it was an opportunity to have community in a moment where kind of building community was really hard and sustaining community was really hard. I always find that being around other playwrights in community is always fulfilling, you know, just in terms of the conversations you have and, you know, hearing each other's work and really kind of, you know, recognizing some of the struggles that we deal with and all that. So for me, the lab was really an opportunity to just gather with two writers who I was not familiar with, who I had never met before, and with Keen, and be able to, you know, just talk and you know, listen to each other's work and really kind of like, you know, because we're in this COVID year and we, you know, I think it's impacted a lot of writers in different ways. You know, I would say that for me, writing was very challenging this year. So it was great to actually be able to have a space where I could say that and not feel like, and feel like that was heard and like recognized and like, you know, other people nodding, you know, saying that, yeah, it was a tough one this year. So I really valued that. And just, you know, so yeah, those are some of the things that I really loved about the lab.
The first thing it provided was accountability. I do feel like life can get really busy, sometimes a bit overwhelming. And it was on a technical level, sort of really nice to have a scheduled thing to prepare for, to spend time thinking about, to write pages for, and knowing that a group of people were waiting for those pages, a group of people were excited to hear whatever it was that I brought, whether it was, you know, 2 pages or 50 pages, that there was this set time to share. So accountability was a big part of it for me. I think also I sort of dedicated this lab time to writing a new play. And I got a bit stuck in the middle, in that I started off strong and had this sort of like idea of a thing, and then that idea sort of morphed halfway through. And so then it was just nice to know that at the end of the lab, there would be this time of sharing so that I could keep thinking through the stuckness, which I don't know if that makes any sense, but it was just nice to know that there was this thing that I could keep thinking toward. Not that I wouldn't have done that on my own, but again, it's like nice to have a destination, or it's nice to know that there's a point B. And so even if you get sort of lost between A and B, you know where B is, and like eventually you'll sort of find a path there. So so it was about, I think, orientation, and having sort of an end goal to think and dream and write toward.
For me, the inspiration, it's really been getting very political, and I've always been a political playwright, but not to the level that the work that's coming out right now has been. And I think it's inspiration from that is just conversations, you know, the conversations at large about identity, claiming point of view, also what's been going on the reservations with, you know, missing, murdered Indigenous women. Also, in this particular piece that I focused on during the Keen Lab, it's about erasure. One thing we noticed culturally, and again, because we've been so on the internet during these past 2 years, that I've really formed stronger ties with the Native theater community across the country. Really, we've built up this sort of level of communication that we never had before. What we've noticed is just our absence in a lot of the conversations at large. Things like COVID, when Dene territory was second in the world for cases and infections, was not even featured on any of the mainstream news stations. The fact that Native people are actually at a higher rate, like we're not trying to compete, we're not trying to do oppression Olympics here, but the fact that Native people get killed by the police at a higher rate than any other ethnic group, including Black people, ratio-wise, and we're just not part of that conversation. We're always dumped in others, so it's that whole question of erasure and just the cyclical effects of colonialism. You know, how just when you think you break through in certain ways, it comes back and it keeps impacting. And so I'm trying to explore that with the pieces I'm working on right now. I like, as an Indigenous playwright, what I really write about is the experience of being in the world we are now and trying to maintain our cultural values and our traditions. So it's sort of striding that old parable about 1 foot in a boat and 1 foot in a canoe, and trying to do that balance that basically all people do that have a very strong culture that is not part of the mainstream. You have to stride in that boat and balance. And I think people don't realize what goes on with us or with other cultures that have that experience. So I like to try and share the duality, constant duality of being who we are. And
I think for many years, I didn't know who I was as a writer. I mean, I think that there was there were a lot of years of sort of figuring out. And so the writers' rooms at that point were helpful in the figuring. They provided a sort of space to experiment, to play, to risk, and a group of artists who were there to sort of ask questions, to say, ooh, there's something exciting there, to encourage. So I think when I first started writing and I was in sort of writers groups early on in my career, it was lovely to have that space to sort of come into myself, to learn about myself. Now, I think there's something really special about being in a space with other writers who have lived life, who have made things, who have been in the industry for a time. And so now it's about sort of a kind of understanding, like we've all been in the trenches, so we're bringing all of that sort of trench life into the space, and there's a different kind of support. There's a sort of like I could say like, oh, I've been doing things a certain way for a long time. I'd like to take a risk, and everyone in the room is like, yeah, I know what that feels like. Like, I know what it is to try something new. I know what it is to wonder if this new thing is going to work out. I don't, I'm not being very articulate, but I feel like there's a comfort to the group now. or or it's a different kind of safety to sort of be entirely myself, and for my pages to be entirely me, and for others to bring in work that is entirely them, and for us to just sit and be with that, sort of without question and without, without question. So it feels sort of warm now, in a way that it didn't at the beginning. I think there was still nervousness at the beginning, and now it feels like more like home, I guess.
So I think when I first got started, I had no experience of sort of the open sharing of the process. Before that, I had always written on my own and brought in the draft and done a reading, and then, you know, gotten feedback from the people in the room, but taken it back and written again on my own, changed it, and brought in another draft. With the emerging writers group, it was the first time I experienced sort of sharing pages in the midst of your process, and people not imposing their structures or ideas, but just asking questions, though that really was helpful for me. Now at this stage, it's more sharing, you know, sharing frustrations, bending an ear, sharing the resources of experience that I found really helpful with Carlos and Harrison. Just sort of when I ran into a roadblock with the commission, brought it up. Everybody was really great at sharing their experiences with their commissions and what they'd gone through. And it just gave me a stronger base to stand upon, also with you and Johnny as well. And again, it was great just sort of sharing where we were and what our process was, and our frustrations too, because with COVID again, productivity has slowed again. You know, you get the energy. I never thought I got energy from other people because I'm generally introverted, but I do. And so again, the process was not as quick as it normally comes, because again, we've all been hermits for a couple years. So I found it interesting to like just share those experiences and know that it's not you know, your process isn't leaving you. It's just the circumstances of the world that we're in. So
question. I think it's really cool that Keen creates a space for writers at this particular moment in their careers, because there are so few there's so few open-ended opportunities like this, that it's just, you know, exciting to be in a room with other folks who have, you know, kind of been around for a while, and the talk is a little bit different. There's a sort of recognition that, like, you know what you're doing, and you don't really necessarily need my thoughts, but thank you for, you know, allowing those conversations, and, you know, being vulnerable and showing stuff that's, you know, early and in progress. And so that was fantastic. You know, I think that's there aren't enough opportunities like that, where you know, we mid-career folks, you know, have space together. It's a play about John Brinkley, who was a doctor who sort of achieved huge popularity in the 20s, 30s, and 40s for a surgical procedure in which he would insert the testicles of goats into human males, as a way of rejuvenating them as they got older. And he made millions of dollars, you know, performing the surgery. And the story doesn't end very well. You know, he's kind of caught out in the fraudulence, and sort of tragic ending for him and his family. And I'm compelled by the story. Partly it came out of, you know, our previous administration, and the sort of fascination I had with the idea of, you know, that that level of fabulism and that level of deceit could actually be accepted as as the reality in which people live in. And so that's kind of the sort of broad stroke of the play. And then in this particular piece, it's part of his practice, his practice was located in Del Rio, Texas at one point. And I went down there a couple of years ago to do some research. And I found all the stuff about his son, John Brinkley, Johnny Boy Brinkley, that was his name, and his life story, and what happened after his father died, and the things that he pursued, and that he was always kind of sucked back to, at least from what I could tell from reading the materials, sucked back to the town of Del Rio, which is this little border town across the Rio Grande from via Cuna in Mexico. So there's a big border fence there, and but anyway, he kept getting sucked back to this town. Partly, his mother lived there till she died, and then he tragically committed suicide in the 1970s, and I just became very interested in the story, and the house. There's the main house where the Brinkleys lived, which is a big pink mansion not too far from the border, and then his house where he lived, which is no longer there, is actually the site of, or at least what I could find from sort of tracking the address, the site of a supermarket, and where the house would have been would be by the dumpsters behind the supermarket, and so that was kind of the impetus for this particular piece. And it really sort of focuses on the relationship between John Jr. and his mother, who still lives in the house, and part of one of the things that he inherited that I was able to glean from my research was a series of recordings. His father was also a pioneer in radio. That's another major part of the story, where they part of his medical practice was a radio station that had the most powerful antenna in the world at the time, and could be broadcast, pretty much across North America all the way into Central America, and he was, he kind of pioneered, he put country musicians on the air for the first time. He did a lot of really, really interesting stuff with the medium, and was kind of a master of the medium. So anyway, John Jr. had a collection of these audio recordings of his father, and every Sunday, John Brinkley Sr. would give a kind of sermon, kind of marrying Christianity and capitalism, and the sort of miracles that could occur when you fuse those two ideas. And so in this particular piece, he's listening to one of his father's recordings, and kind of reflecting on always being, sucked back into Del Rio and the orbit of his past.
Once upon a time, Minnie was queen of Del Rio, oasis in the Texas desert, stone's throw away from the Mexican border. She lives in the Pink Palace at Julia Road, where once upon a time she held court. Diplomats, captains of industry, Hollywood idols, country music legends, King of Siam showed once upon a time, pays respects. Wasn't just the powerful that came. Every Christmas Eve, poor kids from up the road in San Felipe Pueblo and the Via Acuna down across the Rio Grande crowded the mighty palace gates, hungry eyes marveling at the fountains with their dancing water and colored lights, waiting for Queen Minnie and her husband John, famed doctor of the king of the airwaves, and their prince, Johnny Boy Jr. Come outside, unload the truckload of presents, hand them out to each and every one of them. Mind you, this was the Depression. Minnie and her king had come from less than nothing, schemed their way to the top of the American pyramid. Least they could do was give something back and model for young Prince Johnny Boy what it means to be a good citizen. No one comes by anymore. In the bicentennial year 1976, the pink paint's chipped off. Spanish roof tiles are cracked and falling. Weeds have reclaimed the once elegant sweep of the driveway. Swimming pool's empty, except for piles of leaves and dead squirrels. It's South Texas Sunset Boulevard. Minnie's inside. She wanders the grand rooms with their cedar paneling and crystal chandeliers. She's auctioned off half the furniture. She's still paying her husband's debts from 30 years ago when he left this earth disgraced. Lonely nights like this, she calls her Prince Johnny Boy. Every night she begs him to come home, even though he lives a mile away in a bungalow on Avenue E. Johnny Boy always felt ashamed of those Christmas Eves. No matter how many toys he handed out, couldn't ease the ache. They were his age. He had everything, they had nothing. Prince Johnny Boy's traveled the whole wide world, done a slew of things in his life trying to make his mark like Daddy. No matter that Daddy's story ended in shame. College at Yale, law school at UT, U.S. Army stint in Germany, covert work for the CIA, Bay of Pigs, married, had a daughter. 2 months later, wife left them for her true love. He tried living his dream for a spell, setting up a shop as a photographer near Washington Square Park in New York City. At least that's what the obituary says. Every time he thought he finally escaped its gravity, Del Rio dragged him back. Racing towards age 50, he can't help but think, I've been all those places, lived all those lives, but what's it added up to? Not much. Lonely nights in his bungalow at 204 Avenue E, he listens to old acetates of his daddy, king of the airwaves, inherited collection of his regular Sunday night radio sermons, broadcast from Del Rio across the American continent. Johnny Boy was 16 last time he heard his father's real voice. And he listens, grasping for some key in his father's words that might free him from this prison cell. Tonight's sermon's called Groundwork. In his fugue state, he catches only bits and pieces.
You start at the ground to build a cathedral, rather than at the dome.
Johnny Boy's mind wanders. Father coming home with his leg amputated.
A few days ago, a grandson of the owner of one of America's great fortunes finished a 3-year apprentice in a Texas oil field.
His mind wanders. Daddy's casket lowered into the Memphis dirt.
He didn't have to work, but he returned to New York, knowing the business his grandfather made his millions. That young man made the choice to honor his family name.
His mind wanders, blasting a hole into the shell of a giant tortoise on the Galapagos.
He laid a dependable foundation for a towering structure to be built on.
His mind wanders, mother pacing alone in the rooms of the empty pink palace.
He should be an example. In the great plan, your time is a divine allotment. If you are born with sense enough to do anything worthy, it is required you do it.
Telephone ring snapped Johnny awake. Recordings come to an end. Mother's voice on the other end. Will you please come home? Why be there? Why be all alone there when we could be alone together here? He doesn't answer. She hears a pop. Unlike the Pink Palace on Qualia, Johnny Boy's bungalow is not there anymore. They erased it to make way for a supermarket. But some nights, back near the dumpsters, in the blazing Texas heat, you can feel a cold spot.
Recording has started.
Okay. Once upon a time, Minnie was queen of Del Rio, oasis in the Texas desert, stone's throw away from the Mexican border. She lives in the Pink Palace on Qualia Road, where, once upon a time, she held court. Diplomats, captains of industry, Hollywood idols, country music legends. King of Siam showed, once upon a time, to pay his respects. Wasn't just the powerful that came. Every Christmas Eve, poor kids from up the road in San Felipe Pueblo and from Villa Acuna down across the Rio Grande crowded the mighty palace gates. Hungry eyes marveling at the fountains with their dancing water and colored lights, waiting for Queen Minnie and her husband John, famed doctor and king of the airwaves, and their prince, Johnny Boy Jr., come outside, unload the truckload of presents, hand them out to each and every one of them. Mind you, this was the Depression. Minnie and her king had come from less than nothing, schemed their way to the top of the American pyramid. Least they could do was give something back and model for young Prince Johnny Boy what it means to be a good citizen. But no one comes by anymore. In the bicentennial year, 1976, the pink paint's chipped off. Spanish roof tiles are cracked and falling. Weeds have reclaimed the once elegant sweep of the driveway. Swimming pool is empty, except for piles of leaves and dead squirrels. It's a South Texas Sunset Boulevard. Minnie's inside. She wanders the grand rooms with their cedar paneling and crystal chandeliers. She's auctioned off half the furniture. She's still paying her husband's debts from 30 years ago when he left this earth disgraced. Lonely nights like this, she calls her Prince Johnny Boy. Every night she begs him to come home, even though he lives a mile away in a bungalow on Avenue E. Johnny Boy always felt ashamed of those Christmas Eves. No matter how many toys he handed out, he couldn't erase the ache. They were his age. He had everything, and they had nothing. Prince Johnny Boy traveled the whole wide world, done a slew of things in his life, trying to make his mark like Daddy. No matter that Daddy's story ended in shame. College at Yale, law school at UT, U.S. Army stint in Germany, covert work for the CIA, Bay of Pigs, married, had a daughter. 2 months later, wife left him for her true love. Tried living his dream for a spell, setting up a shop as a photographer near Washington Square Park in New York City. At least that's what the obituary says. Every time he thought he finally escaped its gravity, Del Rio dragged him back. Racing towards age 50, he can't help but think, I've been all those places, lived all those lives, but what has it added up to? Not much. Lonely nights in his bungalow at 204 Avenue E, he listens to old acetates of his daddy, king of the airwaves. Inherited collection of his regular Sunday night radio sermons, broadcast from Del Rio across the American continent. Johnny Boy was 16 last time he heard his father's real voice. He listens, grasping for some key in his father's words that might free him from this prison cell. Tonight's sermon is called Groundwork. In his fugue state, he catches only bits and pieces.
You start at the ground to build a cathedral rather than at the dome.
Johnny Boy's mind wanders. Father coming home with his leg amputated.
A few days ago, a grandson of the owner of one of America's great fortunes finished a 3-year apprentice in a Texas oil field.
His mind wanders. Daddy's casket lowered into the Memphis dirt.
He didn't have to work, but he returned to New York, knowing the business his grandfather made his millions. That young man came and made the choice to honor his family name.
His mind wanders, blasting a hole in the shell of a giant tortoise on the Galapagos.
He laid a dependable foundation for a towering structure to be built on.
His mind wanders. Mother pacing alone in the empty rooms of the Pink Palace.
You should be an example. In the great plan, your time is a divine allotment. If you are born with sense enough to do anything worthy, it is required you do it.
Telephone rings. Snaps Johnny awake. Recordings come to an end. Mother's voice on the other end. Will you please come home? Why be all alone there when we could be alone together here? He doesn't answer. She hears a pop. Unlike the Pink Palace on Kolia, Johnny Boy's bungalow is not there anymore. They erased it to make way for a supermarket. But some nights, back near the dumpsters, in the blazing Texas heat, you can feel a cold spot.
I'm hoping to have a draft in March, April, if my timing works out the way I hope it works out. It's been a challenging year, just finding time to move the play forward. So that's kind of the timetable. And if you're interested in sort of crazy moments of history brought to life on stage, this might be the play for you.
The Apple is the play you're going to see the excerpts from. It is a time travel story set in 2021 New York City, COVID times running rampant. Two siblings, two sisters in New York City in contemporary times, and in the past, around the time of the American Rebellion, as it was called at that time, with two siblings again, two brothers who actually existed, Corn Planter and Handsome Lake, Seneca chiefs, who had the same father who was not indigenous and a native mother. And during that time period, the hereditary council of chiefs of the Haudenosaunee had declared themselves neutral. They were not going to get involved in the American Rebellion. The Brits and the Americans were going to fight it out, and we were going to sit on the sidelines and just do trade with whoever won. Well, Corn Planter saw that the Quakers, who were closest to his territories, were getting eviscerated and attacked because of their nature, who they were, Quakers. And so he decided to stand up for them and get involved. And that caused a huge rift in the covenant chain of the Haudenosaunee, which has never been broken, but it certainly has been stretched. And it was stretched at that moment because his brother decided to assist the Brits as a response. And so I bring Corn Planter into 21st century New York City. Sky Woman is our host of the journeys of the two sets of siblings, and she will be featured in the scene here, and you will see the main character, Jessie, who is a nurse in New York City, and she is Tuscarora, and she has a non-native boyfriend named Don, who Sky Woman will be having a conversation with. Don unbeknownst to him or Jesse, has COVID.
My sister and I used to get in so much trouble because we would not keep our curtains closed at night. Mom would be so mad. Stop asking for trouble. The darkness is Flint's realm. Bad things happen at night, Jessica. Well, that was the point. We wanted to see spirits. We wanted to see Flint. We wanted to be bad. I don't know what it is about the dangerous things. There's always something more inviting about being bad. It's like there's something inside, something that demands we test that edge, kick it in the face, the chance to say, I risk this, I challenge this, and I survived, bitches. Maybe that's why everyone is pushing the limits of the quarantine, daring Flint and his bat disease to come and get us all. I understand it. Heck, I feel like it myself sometimes. And then I go to work and I am rooted. I see the faces of my patients, their fear and their helplessness. Real, tangible danger. In a way, they haunt me. I bring them all home with me. I think that is what Mom meant. Look too long at the darkness and the darkness will see you. It will never leave you. You never feel safe. I miss friends, the joy of the crowd, the faces of my patients and their pain are there every day. Truth, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't. Maybe it's a result of studying settler medicine, but I am a science girl now every day. Sometimes when I look out over the park, I think I can see these flickering little gray stick figures. And I wonder, is there truth in those stories? Is it this city that's a lie? I wonder. Mom would hate this window.
Well, hello, handsome.
Hello, ma'am.
Kind of late to be sitting in the park by yourself, isn't it?
I'm not worried.
Really? There's so many ghosts in this park.
That's me too. I'm
Not quite. Not yet.
Well, that's reassuring.
There are too many ghosts, actually.
Can you see them all?
Yes. This plague, it takes all peoples. So many people not at rest. Someone needs to do a big feast. Send them on their journey.
Are there any ghosts on this spot?
Yes. This is a beautiful park, but once it was farms, and before that, villages. There is a lot of blood under your feet.
That's the whole city.
Where you're sitting, two men once fought over an apple tree right there. The elder killed the younger, and he stole all the apples. Now, whenever anyone sits there and eats an apple, the ghost tries to take it.
Oh.
Is there a problem?
Well, I was hoping for a more interesting story.
You wanted to know about a ghost. I told you about a ghost.
But it's so mundane.
That is mostly mundane. It's upsetting and horrible for families, but it's mostly mundane.
I don't know. I guess I was hoping for some story about a heroic Native American warrior who took down the British or something like that.
How do you know this story isn't about natives?
True. You are a native.
Yeah, but I know a lot of ghost stories.
Do you know mine?
I don't know. How about you tell me? It would be nice for someone to tell me a story for once.
About 10 years ago, there was a shooting in this neighborhood. A pedestrian was walking through the park and caught a bullet in the back. And we didn't know if it was a stray or intentional. There was no robbery, and this guy had no known enemies, no suspicious habits, but boom, he's a victim. He survives, had to spend some time in the hospital, but he's okay. Us? We got nothing. Just one lousy tip from a hot dog vendor, a hot dog falafel cart. You know one of those guys. And he claimed he'd seen a black guy running in the opposite direction. So, of course, we were like, well, that's general, but okay, we'll look into it.
Oh my.
Yeah, I know, right? So racist. Anyway, we start canvassing the area for a black guy for weeks. We used the description the hot dog guy gave us, but the problem was the description kept changing in small ways, but first he was tall, then he was short, then he was lighter skinned, and then he was dark, and he had dreadlocks, then he had short hair. The guy was really not a good liar. It made me suspicious, so I started looking into his background. Guess what?
What?
Turns out it was the hot dog vendor. Can you believe that?
No.
Yep.
Wow. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah. Apparently, this pedestrian had been a customer of his for a while, but he started bad-mouthing the cart. He claimed the vendor was buying cheap hot dogs, non-kosher. He told his neighbors, and it was killing the hot dog guy's business. The vendor got so pissed off, he shot him.
Not fair.
Right? To be honest, the victim was kind of a dick. I had to interview him a few times. He was one of those whiny assholes.
Oh, so it was okay that this guy shot him?
No.
Okay, so why did you tell me this story?
It's the story of how I made a ghost right here. The hot dog vendor made a break for it. I was just out of being a rookie, and I shot him. I put him down so quick I didn't even realize it.
Yes, I can see now. You were a baby.
I was a little shit, and it was too early for me to have a gun.
You panicked.
Yeah, they train us how to operate the weapon, but they don't train us how not to panic.
Why did you tell me that story?
Maybe because it wasn't mundane to me. My girlfriend's native, like you. She says you guys believe ghosts stay with us?
They walk on, but they walk with us when we need them.
Do you see him here? The hot dog vendor?
No.
Damn. I would love the chance to say sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, man! Do you think he heard me?
I did.
Where I am in this play, this is very much a first draft. I am I would say 2 scenes away from the end of the first draft, and I definitely need to do some more workshopping, but I want it to be a musical. So we're working on involving a composer. There will be a reading with Alter Theater in January or February, and have a few invited folks for that. And then we will start working with a composer to see how the story takes shape. But right now it's very much a first draft. Alter Theater will be sharing updates with their subscribers with the process, and I will be making announcements as as we get the reading up and go through the process. You can certainly follow me at RAMIREV on Twitter. And that's where I usually post my updates for the progress of the work.
Yeah, so in the lab, I've been working on a play called Maybe the Saddest Thing. And it is set in a city in the South. It features 3 characters, Deshawn, Frankie, and Noble. Deshawn sells drugs, Frankie cleans hotel rooms, and Noble makes sandwiches. These are smart Black humans who are also stuck. And the play, I think, for me, is about ruts, about these ruts that we find ourselves in, these sort of paths perhaps that we didn't intend to take, but we keep trotting them over and over and over again, and what it might take to get out of that rut, to bust out. So that's sort of the lay of the land. At present, I am 2/3 done with the play, I think. It's a play in 5 parts, and parts 1, 2, and 3 feel good-ish, feel like they are on the way somewhere. Part 4 is like a little nebulous, but like coming into focus. And part 5, well, who knows what part 5 is, but it will one day exist. And in terms of what folks are about to hear, one of the organizing principles of the play is that Deshawn writes poetry. And so at the start of each part, the characters share a poem of Deshawn's as a kind of organizing idea for the section. So we will hear 3 separate poems of Deshawn's that sort of give you a sense of the tone and direction for the scenes that will follow.
He was unexpected, like regret, like fine, 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 and then not fine. Like a wave of nausea when you're out in public and it's Saturday night and you made an effort and you suddenly have to vomit, like your insides are all liquid and fire, but you're in a cab and the windows don't roll, which you know, because the first thing you always do when you get into a cab is lower the windows. Regardless of the season, regardless of the sleet or the snow, because the air never doesn't feel good. He was unexpected, like a long lost cousin who shows up at your high school graduation. Sorry. He was unexpected, like regret, like fine, 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 and then not fine. Like a wave of nausea when you're out in public and it's a Saturday night and you've made an effort and you suddenly have to vomit like your insides are all liquid and fire, but you're in a cab and the windows don't roll, which, you know, because the first thing you always do when you enter a cab is lower the windows, regardless of the season, regardless of the sleet or the snow, because the air never doesn't feel good. He was unexpected, like a long lost cousin who shows up at your high school graduation with a family of his own, eclipsing your accomplishment. He was unexpected, like love, like the flu. Because really, how different are those two things anyway?
I didn't know what to say when you asked me if I'd done this before. If I close talk with a boy, felt his hot breath on my neck, explored his body with my fingertips, his mouth with my tongue. If I undressed him slowly, first the shirt, button by button, and then the pants with a tricky zipper. If I pulled him over the hump of his ass and the swell of his thighs past his ankles and onto the floor, and hooked my fingers between the waistband of his briefs, releasing his dick. And if I'd taken it into my mouth and coaxed him to beg before taking it into myself, from the front, from the back, and from the side. If I had grunted and grabbed and ground and sweated, and if I'd ever wanted more, and found that there wasn't enough. You asked me if I'd ever done this before, and the look on your face made me want to say, no.
He said, do what you want. Like I could have been anyone. Like we didn't share a bed or a shower, or sometimes even underwear if we'd been busy and hadn't had a chance to do laundry. He said it like we didn't lick ice cream off the same cone, or drink from the same cups, or slurp from the same spoons. Like I hadn't seen him cry, or bleed, or vomit, or come. Like I hadn't watched him pee, or take a shit, or brush dandruff from his shoulder, or kissed him in the morning before he brushed his teeth. He said, do what you want. Like he hadn't met my parents, and like I hadn't met his, and like we hadn't traveled thousands of miles together to celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving at homes that weren't ours, suitcases full of presents. He said it like I hadn't held his hand at his grandmother's funeral, at his aunt's funeral, at his brother's funeral. He said, do what you want. Like we hadn't dreamed together or wished on stars together. Like we hadn't talked about adopting a dog for him or a cat for me and having a child. Like we hadn't discussed DNR and the pros and cons of cremation. He said, do what you want, like he hadn't proposed and like I hadn't said yes. He said, do what you want. Like none of that. Like I didn't, like I never. So I left.
In terms of next steps, I mean, the first step, the sort of most important step is probably that I finished the play. So that's on me, not on anybody else. That's on me. You know, I feel like I learned so much by hearing a play. So I do think that the next step post finishing would be to hear the play with human beings, with voices, to talk about the play, to talk about what's on the page. Especially with this play, I feel like it's come in sort of fits and starts and spurts. And I think that the things on the page sort of adhere, but I actually don't know if they adhere yet because they exist in sort of these fits and starts in its sort of genesis. So I think hearing the play and talking about the play with smart, talented people would be the ideal next step.